The Grand Canyon is 277 miles long, up to 80 miles wide, and attains a depth of over a mile. While the specific geologic processes and timing that form the Grand Canyon are the subject of debate by geologists, recent evidence suggests the Colorado River established its course through the canyon at least 17 million years ago. When countries assess their annual carbon dioxide emissions, they count up their cars and power stations, but bushfires are not included, presumably because they're deemed to be events beyond human control. In Australia, Victoria alone sees several 100,000 hectares burn each year. In both 2004 and the present summer, the figure has been over 1 million hectares. At the beginning of each fiscal year, funds are allocated to each state account in accordance with the university's financial plan. Funds are allocated to each account by object of expenditure. Account managers are responsible for ensuring that adequate funds are available in the appropriate object before initiating transactions to use the funds. While blue is one of the most popular colors, it is one of the least appetizing. Blue food is rare in nature. Food researchers say that when humans search for food, they learn to avoid toxic or spoiled objects, which were often blue, black, or purple. When food dyed blue is served to study objects, they lose appetite. Although it hails from a remote region of the western Himalayas, this plant now looks entirely at home on the banks of English rivers. Brought to the UK in 1839, it quickly escaped from the Victorian gardens and colonized riverbanks and damp woodlands. Now it is spreading across Europe, New Zealand, Canada, and the US. How do we imagine the unimaginable? If we're asked to think of an object, say a yellow tulip, a picture immediately forms in our mind. But what if we try to imagine a concept, such as the square root of a negative number? The core of the problem was the immense disparity between the country's productive capacity and the ability of people to consume. Great innovations in productive techniques during and after the war raised the output of industry beyond the purchasing capacity of U.S. farmers and wage earners. Pluto lost its official status as a planet yesterday when the International Astronomical Union downsized the solar system from 9 to 8 planets. Although there had been passionate debate at the IAU General Assembly meeting in Prague about the definition of a planet and whether Pluto met the specifications, the audience greeted the decision to exclude it with applause. Although Botswana's economic outlook remains strong, the devastation that AIDS has caused threatens to destroy the country's future. In 2001, Botswana has the highest rates of HIV infection in the world. With the help of international donors, it launched an ambitious national campaign that provided free antiviral drugs to anyone who need them. And by March 2004, Botswana's infection rate has dropped significantly. New research shows that during the global financial crisis, workers who stayed in jobs did not reduce their working hours, despite the claims that cuts in hours have led to job losses. A study found that the length of people who stayed with the same employer remained relatively unchanged. Food is one of the most important things you ever buy, and yet most people never bother to think about their food and where it comes from. People spend a lot more time worrying about what kind of blue jeans to wear, what kind of video games to play, and what kind of computers to buy. A young man from a small provincial town, a man without independent wealth, without powerful family connections, and without a university education, moved to London in the late 1580s, and in a remarkably short time became the greatest playwright not of his age alone, but of all time. How did Shakespeare become Shakespeare? Lincoln's apparently radical change of mind about his raw power to emancipate slaves was caused by the escalating scope of war, which convinced him that any measure to weaken the Confederacy and strengthen the Union war effort was justifiable as a military necessity. Akimbo. This must be one of the odder-looking words in the language. It puzzles us, in part because it doesn't seem to have any relatives. What's more, it is now virtually a fossil word. Until recently, almost invariably found in arms, akimbo, a posture in which a person stands with hands on hips and elbows sharply bent outward, one that signals impatience and hostility. Yellow is the most optimistic color, yet surprisingly, people lose their tempers most often in yellow rooms, and babies cry more in them. The reason may be that yellow is the hardest color on the eye. On the other hand, it speeds metabolism and enhances concentration. Think of yellow legal pads and post-it notes. The situation is similar to a pregnant woman that has twin babies in her belly. Loeb of the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics. He's proposing the idea in a paper that's been accepted for publication in an astrophysical journal Letters. Moods may also have an effect on how information is processed by influencing the extent to which judges rely on pre-existing internal information or focus on new external information. Positive moods promote more holistic and top-down processing style, while negative moods recruit more stimulus-driven and bottom-up processing. Such cross-protection is usually seen between two animals, but Gore studies the same sort of mutualism in microbes. He and his team demonstrated the first experimental example of that cross-protective relationship in drug-resistant microbes, using two strains of antibiotic-resistant E. coli bacteria, one resistant to ampicillin, the other to chloramphenicol. Modern buildings have to achieve certain performance requirements, at least to satisfy those of building codes, to provide a safe, healthy, and comfortable environment. However, these conditioned environments demand resources in energy and materials, which are both limited in supply, to build and operate. Botanic gardens are scientific and cultural institutions established to collect, study, exchange, and display plants for research and for the education and enjoyment of the public. There are major botanic gardens in each capital city. Zoological parks and aquariums are primarily engaged in the breeding, preservation, study, and display of native and exotic fauna in captivity. The best comparison is likely a magnetar, a young neutron star with a powerful magnetic field, the researchers said. Magnetars also produce bright X-ray flares. While magnetars are thought to be young stars, the two flaring objects in this study reside near elliptical galaxies, which contain older stars. So the objects are likely too old to be magnetars, the researchers said. As a historian, if you really want to understand the sensibilities of those who live in the past, you must be like a novelist and get into the skins of your characters and think and feel as they do. You're asked to imagine what it's like to be a peasant in medieval times, asking the sort of questions a peasant may ask. What the writer is saying is that a historian needs imaginative sympathy with ordinary people in the past. It is difficult to tell whether the speaker approves of Hemingway's lifestyle or not. He was famously macho and spent a lot of time hunting wild animals, going to wars, and getting into fights. All these things got into his books, and the speaker thinks that this is not necessarily a good thing, as it means that too many people prefer to read about his life than read his books. The beginning of the 21st century will be remembered not for military conflicts or political events, but for a whole new age of globalization, a flattening of the world. The explosion of advanced technologies now means that suddenly knowledge pools and resources have connected all over the planet, leveling the playing field as never before. The primary application we're targeting at first is to give people a decision aid during rehabilitation following an acute knee injury to help them understand when they can perform particular activities and when they can move to different intensities of particular activities, a useful thing to take a crack at. Humans need to use energy in order to exist, so it is unsurprising that the way people have been producing energy is largely responsible for current environmental problems. Pollution comes in many forms, but those that are most concerning because of their impact on health result from the combustion of fuels in power stations and cars. The border itself between Mexico and the United States is fraught with a mix of urban and desert terrain and spans over 1,900 miles. Both the uninhabited areas of the border and urban areas are where the most drug trafficking and illegal crossings take place. Crime is prevalent in urban cities like El Paso, Texas, and San Diego, California.
Networking is easy and fun because it taps into this human predilection to talk about ourselves when asked. Consider successful networking as little more than the process of guiding a person to tell you about his life, what he's doing, the company that employs him, and his current industry. It's not that human activities didn't impact wildlife at all, of course. Heavily hunted species like white-tailed deer, gray squirrels, and raccoons were photographed somewhat less often in hunted areas. Coyotes showed up more often in hunted areas. While most species didn't avoid hiking trails, the predator actually preferred them. Another administration option is to bake marijuana at a relatively low temperature to kill any dangerous microorganisms, and then allow that patient to eat it or drink it. Both of these methods of administration make smoking the drug unnecessary. However, criticism of medical marijuana has also been raised because as a natural plant, it cannot be patented and marketed by pharmaceutical companies and is unlikely to win widespread medical acceptance. In the photo, the wildcat's huge paws are clamped onto the side of the white safari jeep, in which Chapel was a passenger. Almost as tall as the jeep on her hind legs, she appears to be forcing the muzzle into the black window. First discovered in 2007, fast radio bursts continue to defy explanation. These cosmic chirps last thousands of seconds. The characteristic of the radio pulses suggests that they came from galaxies billions of light years away. However, new work points to a much closer origin, flaring stars within our own galaxy. The brain is divided into two hemispheres, called the left and right hemispheres. Each hemisphere provided a different set of functions, behaviors, and controls. The right hemisphere is often called the creative side of the brain, while the left hemisphere is the logical and analytical side of brain. The right hemisphere controls the left part of the body, and the left hemisphere controls the right side. Weakness in electronics, auto, and gas station sales dragged down overall retail sales last month. But excluding those three categories, retailers enjoyed a healthy increase across the board, according to government figures released Wednesday. Moreover, December sales numbers were also revised higher.
It isn't rare for private equity houses to hire grads fresh out of business school, he said, but 9 times out of 10, the students who nab these jobs are the ones who had private equity experience under their belt before even starting their MBA program.
How quickly is the world's population growing? In the United States and other developed countries, the current growth rate is very low. In most developing countries, the human population is growing at 3 people per second. Because of this busting growth rate, human population is growing to reach 9 billion within your lifetime. Electronic discourse is one form of interactive electronic communication. In this study, we reserve the term for the two-directional text, in which one person using a keyboard writes language that appears on sender's monitor and is transmitted to the monitor of recipient, who responds by keyboard. For any marketing course that requires development of marketing plan, such as marketing management, marketing strategy, and segmentation support marketing. This is the only planning handbook that guides students through the step-by-step creation of customized marketing plan, while offering commercial software to aid in the process. Written examinations are a fact of life for most high school and university students. However, recent studies have shown that this traditional form of assessment may not be an accurate indicator of academic performance. Tests have shown that many students experience anxiety during exam weeks, which leads to poorer results. As a result, some learning institutions are replacing exams with alternative assessments, such as group work and oral presentations. Since its inception, the UN system has been working to ensure adequate food for all through sustainable agriculture. The majority of the world's poorest people live in rural areas of developing countries. They depend on agriculture and related activities for their livelihood. This makes them particularly vulnerable to man-made and natural influences that reduce agricultural production. It seems that language appeared from nowhere, since no other species has anything resembling human language. However, other animals do possess basic systems for perceiving and producing sounds that enable them to communicate. These systems may have been in place before the appearance of language.
Augustus was given the powers of an absolute monarch, but he presented himself as the preserver of republican tradition. He treated the Senate, or State Council, with great respect and was made consul year after year. He successfully reduced the political power of the army by retiring many soldiers, but giving them land or money to keep their loyalty. As to the Industrial Revolution, one cannot dispute today the fact that it has succeeded in inaugurating in a number of countries a level of mass prosperity which was undreamed of in the days preceding the Industrial Revolution. But on the immediate impact of Industrial Revolution, there were substantial divergences among writers.
The diversity of human language may be compared to the diversity of the natural world. Just as the extinction of different plants deprives humanity of biomedical resources, so too would the extinction of other languages lead to deprivation of culture, wealth, and art. If bonus or incentive pay schemes work so well for senior executives and bankers, why does everyone not get them? After all, many jobs involve making important decisions or taking risks. Is there anything about corporate decisions and financial risks that makes these categories of work special in terms of how they need to be incentivized and rewarded? The uniquely scented flavor of vanilla is second only to chocolate in popularity on the world's palate. It's also the second most expensive spice after saffron. But highly labor-intensive cultivation methods and the plant's temperamental life cycle and propagation mean production on a global scale is struggling to keep up with the increasing demand for the product. This book is not ordinary book and should not be read through from beginning to end. It contains many different adventures, and the path you take will depend on the choices you make along the way. The success or failure of your mission will depend on the decisions you make, so you think carefully before choosing. Legal writing is usually less discursive than writing in other humanities subjects, and precision is more important than variety. Sentence structure should not be too complex. It is usually unnecessary to make extensive use of adjectives or adverbs, and consistency of terms is often required. The semiconductor industry has been able to improve the performance of electric systems for more than 4 decades by making ever smaller devices. However, this approach will soon encounter both scientific and technical limits, which is why the industry is exploring a number of alternative device technologies. The Japanese tea ceremony is a ritual influenced by Buddhism in which green tea is prepared and served to a small group of guests in a peaceful setting. The ceremony can take as long as hours, and there are many traditional gestures that both server and the guest must perform. Long isolated from Western Europe, Russia grew up without participating in shared developments like the Reformation. Russians took pride in their unique culture and found dubious value in foreign ideals. As a result, Russia is the most unusual member of the European family, if indeed it can be considered one at all. This question is still hotly debated, particularly amongst Russians. Exhilarating, exhausting, and intense. These are just some of the words used to describe doing an MBA. Everyone's experience of doing MBA is, of course, different through denying that it's hard and a demanding work whichever course you do. MBA is one of the fastest growing area of studying in the UK, so that must be a sustainable benefit against form in one pain.
The provision of accurate and authoritative statistical information strengthens our society. It provides a basis for decisions to be made on public policy, such as determining electoral boundaries and where to locate schools and hospitals. It also allows businesses to know their market, grow their business, and improve their marketing strategies by targeting their activities appropriately.